Young cab driver offers a complimentary ride to a weeping girl. A few days later, a limousine arrives, and what unfolds is astonishing. Love brought them together. Rain fell heavily on the city's outskirts, transforming the narrow, dimly lit road into a slippery, shining hazard. Water pooled in uneven potholes, mirroring the flickering yellow glow of weary streetlights. Distant thunder rumbled, and occasional lightning flashes cast eerie shapes onto the wet pavement. It was a sort of night that sent people rushing indoors, windows sealed, curtains drawn. But Linda had nowhere to go. She sat huddled by the guardrail, her thin dress soaked and clinging to her skin. Her mascara had long since run down her face, and she hugged her knees, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. Her hands shook uncontrollably, not only from the cold, but from the fear tightening her chest. 3 figures lingered nearby. The young men wore damp hoodies and sneakers, the kind who sought mischief on a rainy night. They circled her like predators, their voices taunting, laughter sharp and threatening. "Hey, princess," one said, leaning in. "Are you waiting for someone or just hoping someone like me shows up?" Another teased. "Come on, sweetheart. It's a rough night. Let us keep you company." Linda shook her head, barely able to speak. "Please, just go away." "Oh," she speaks. The third mocked. "Why don't we all hang out a bit, huh?" That's when headlights appeared bright and sudden, cutting through the rain. A yellow taxi screeched to a stop, splashing water onto the curb. The driver's door flew open. Jack, tall, lean, and drenched, stepped out. His presence was immediate and commanding. Concern and a hint of menace flashed across his face as he shouted, "Back off!" He positioned himself between Linda and the men. "Leave her alone," he ordered. The leader laughed. "What's this? Night in a yellow chariot?" Jack didn't flinch. "You got 5 seconds." The tension rose. One of the men looked ready to challenge him, but the fire in Jack's eyes and his determined stance made them think twice. "Not worth it," they muttered, retreating into the darkness. Once they were gone, Jack turned to Linda, his tone gentle. "Are you all right?" She nodded, lips too pale to speak. Her whole body trembled, fingers numb. "Come on," Jack said softly. "Let's get you out of the rain." He helped her up, steadying her with one hand and grabbing an umbrella with the other. He opened the taxi door for her, and she climbed in, hugging herself tightly. Inside, the taxi was warm, a sharp contrast to the storm outside. She sank into the seat, silent, eyes fixed on the blurred city lights. Jack got in, glancing at her in the rear-view mirror. "Where to?" he asked. I don't know," she whispered. "I don't have any money. I just needed to get away." Jack paused, then started the engine. "I wasn't asking about your wallet," he said, eyes on the road. "I asked where you need to go." She didn't answer right away. They drove in silence, windshield wipers matching the rhythm of the rain. Finally, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, "Just somewhere quiet, somewhere I can't be found tonight." Jack nodded. "I know a place." He took her to a small park on the city's edge, where trees swayed in the wind and the path lights glowed faintly but steadily. The rain eased to a drizzle. Jack parked under a tree and turned off the engine. He didn't look back or press for details. He simply handed her a pack of tissues and sat with her in the stillness. She took a shaky breath, wiped her face, then turned to him. "Why did you stop?" He shrugged. "You looked like you needed someone to." She stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Thank you. You're the first person tonight who hasn't asked who I am, just if I'm okay." Jack met her gaze in the mirror. That's all that mattered. And in that quiet moment, beneath gray skies and flickering streetlights, something unspoken passed between them. Something gentle and fragile, not yet understood by either. But it had begun. The windshield wipers murmured as Jack drove through the rain-soaked streets, leaving chaos behind and heading toward the city's quieter edges. In the mirror, he watched Linda curled in the back seat, arms wrapped around herself. Her mascara stained her cheeks, lips trembling, and despite her efforts to compose herself, sobs escaped in broken waves. She never shared what had happened. Jack didn't press. He simply drove, letting the silence and the cab's warmth comfort her. His fingers tapped softly on the steering wheel, not out of impatience, but from a wish to help. "Is there somewhere safe I can take you?" he finally asked, his voice calm. Linda nodded faintly. "A park. Just somewhere quiet. I don't want to go home." He didn't ask why. He just nodded, turned left, and took her to a place he often visited when the world felt overwhelming, a small city park hidden behind closed cafes and darkened bookstores. The kind of place few remembered after dark. When he parked near the entrance, he turned off the engine but left the lights on low. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the city around them was hushed and half asleep. Linda remained motionless for a while before finally breaking the silence. "You didn't ask me any questions." Jack met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "I didn't think you needed any," he replied. Her eyes welled up again, but this time with relief rather than fear. She sniffled, dabbed her face with the tissue he'd given her, then slowly opened the door and stepped out. She paused, leaning forward. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but genuine. "You're the first person tonight who didn't expect anything from me. You just helped. You were kind." Jack nodded. "Take care, Linda." She stepped into the mist, her silhouette briefly lit by the taxi's glow before vanishing into the trees. And just like that, she was gone. Jack sat there, staring at the empty space she'd left, then started the engine and drove away. He never expected to see her again. He didn't even know her last name, but her presence lingered, her voice, her sadness, her gratitude. Over the following days, Jack found himself thinking of her more than he'd imagined. He'd glance at the back seat at the start of every shift, half expecting to find her there. Something about her had left a mark on him, a feeling he couldn't quite describe. Then, for days later, everything changed. After dropping off a passenger in the business district, a sleek black limousine pulled up in front of his taxi. The contrast was striking, his battered cab beside the elegant, chauffeur-driven car. Jack blinked in surprise as the limo's driver stepped out, holding a small white envelope, and handed it through Jack's window. "For you?" the driver said. "Ms. Linda requests your presence tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., 17 Evergreen Lane." Jack opened the envelope to find a simple card. Inside, in graceful handwriting, were the words, "I'd like to thank you properly. You were there when no one else was. Linda." He stared at the card for a long moment, then looked up to see the limousine already pulling away. Jack sensed this was only the beginning. The next evening, just before sunset, Jack drove his taxi to Evergreen Lane, a tree-lined street that felt worlds away from his usual routes. At the end of the cul-de-sac stood a grand iron gate, which swung open as he approached, revealing a sprawling estate bathed in golden light. He parked at the edge of the driveway, feeling out of place among the manicured gardens and luxury vehicles. Before he could get out, a valet opened his door and gestured toward the entrance. Jack straightened his jacket, warm but clean, and walked up to the grand double doors, his heart pounding. As he reached the top step, the door opened and there was Linda. But this was not the rain-soaked girl from his taxi. She stood tall and poised in a cream silk dress, her hair softly curled, her makeup flawless. For a moment, Jack wondered if he'd made a mistake. Then she smiled. "Hi, Jack," she said gently. "I'm glad you came." He nodded, still unsure. "You look different." She laughed softly. "I feel different, too. Come in." She led him through a gleaming foyer, past polished floors and sparkling chandeliers. They settled in a cozy dining room that, despite its size, felt warm and inviting. A table for two was set by the window, candles flickering between them. Dinner was already served, roasted vegetables, seared salmon, and fresh bread. Jack glanced at the table, then at Linda. "I didn't expect this," he admitted. Linda poured water for them both and sat across from him. "I didn't expect you either," she replied. "But I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to explain." Jack waited as she took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the window before returning to him. "My full name is Linda Fairchild. I'm the only daughter of Richard Fairchild, CEO of Fairchild Global. You've probably seen the name on a few buildings." Jack blinked in surprise. "You're that Fairchild?" She nodded. "The night you found me, I was supposed to be at an engagement party and arranged one. My father was marrying me off to a business partner's son. It was all about business, legacy, and image. Her voice grew tense. But the man was a liar and a cheat. I refused to be part of another business deal disguised as a marriage. Jack leaned in, his voice gentle. So you ran away? I did, she said. I left in the rain. No phone, no driver. Just me and a lot of mascara. Jack smiled. You picked a tough night for it. Linda smiled back. And I would have kept running if you hadn't stopped. You didn't know who I was. Didn't want anything. You just saw me. Jack looked away, uneasy. You seemed like someone who needed a place to breathe. I did, she replied. You gave me that and more. She paused. That's why I want to thank you properly. She reached under the table and placed a white envelope between them. Jack glanced at it, then shook his head. If that's money, I can't accept it. It's not charity, she said quickly. It's gratitude. I didn't help you for a reward, he said firmly. It just felt right. Linda studied him for a long moment, then slowly withdrew the envelope. You really are different. Jack gave a casual shrug. I'm just being myself. She smiled again, softer this time. Then let's eat as just two people. Not a Fairchild, not a taxi driver. Just us. For the first time, Jack felt at ease. He picked up his fork, and as they shared stories over dinner, laughter gradually replaced the formal atmosphere. The gap between their worlds seemed to vanish, if only for a little while. In the days that followed, Linda reached out to Jack again, not with fancy invitations or chauffeurs, but with a simple text. Want to go for a ride? Just me. Just freedom. And that's how it started. Jack became her unofficial driver for escape. Whenever the pressures of her life became too much, she'd call, and he'd arrive in his old yellow cab, ready to take her anywhere far from expectations and stress. No plans, no destinations, just two people carving out moments where they could breathe. Their first getaway was to a food truck hidden behind a downtown warehouse. They ate grilled cheese sandwiches sitting on the hood of his taxi, napkins fluttering in the breeze, laughing at how long it had been since Linda last ate off a paper plate. Another day, she convinced Jack to rent 2 bicycles from a rundown shop near the river. They rode through the park, laughing as Linda nearly toppled trying to dodge a squirrel. She wore jeans and a baseball cap, no makeup, no pretense, just herself, free and real. They made up games, like guessing strangers' jobs as they passed by. That guy? Definitely a dentist. Linda would say. No one smiles that wide unless they sell tea for a living. Jack pointed at another person. See her boots? Librarian, but the kind who reads crime novels after hours. The more time they spent together, the more their walls came down. Linda shared stories of her lonely childhood in a house full of staff, the pressure to be perfect, and years of being told who she should be. Jack listened without judgment. He told her about growing up in a working-class neighborhood, learning to fix cars with his dad, and dreaming of seeing more than the same streets every day. Linda laughed more. Jack smiled more. They talked about everything and nothing, often losing track of time until city lights flickered on. Then came the night of the fireworks. It was a local festival. Neither planned to attend, but they stumbled upon it during a spontaneous drive. Jack pulled into an empty field just outside the park, where the fireworks were about to start. They sat on the hood, a blanket between them. The cool night air buzzed with excitement as bursts of color lit the sky. Linda tilted her head back and sighed. This is the first time in years I feel like I'm not performing. Jack looked at her, the fireworks reflecting in her eyes. Maybe this is who you really are. She turned to him and smiled. And who are you, Jack? He hesitated. Someone try not to fall for someone way out of his league. Linda laughed softly, not mockingly, but warmly, touched. A few moments passed in silence. Then, as another firework exploded overhead, their hands brushed on the blanket. Jack froze. Linda stayed still. He glanced down, then quickly pulled his hand away. Sorry. She looked at him, her smile gentle and understanding. Don't be. Jack turned away, cheeks flushed, heart racing. He didn't speak for the rest of the show, but Linda didn't need words. That quiet moment said more than any could. The headlines hit like a storm. Heiress on the run. Billionaire's daughter spotted with taxi driver. From mansions to mufflers. Who was the mystery man? Linda Fairchild's secret romance. Love or rebellion? The media frenzy was instantaneous, relentless, and everywhere. Paparazzi photos flooded newsstands, blogs, and social media. There was Linda in jeans and a baseball cap, her arm brushing Jack's. Another showed them laughing over sandwiches at a street cart. One viral image captured them sitting on the hood of his taxi, legs dangling, heads leaning toward each other under soft streetlights. It was meant to be sweet. Now, under intense scrutiny, it felt like proof. The photo made headlines for its intimacy, dissected by every commentator with a keyboard and an opinion. Some romanticized it a modern Cinderella, a heartwarming escape from privilege. Others called it reckless, irresponsible, a publicity stunt. Jack first saw the coverage on a flickering TV behind a gas station counter. He'd stopped for coffee between shifts, and there was his face, his cab, his moment with Linda plastered across the news. His stomach twisted not from fear, but from knowing what was coming next. By the time he checked his phone, it was flooded with missed calls, voicemails, and unknown numbers. His name was everywhere. Blogs speculated about his background. Some painted him as a hero, others as a gold digger. No one asked him directly, but the silence that mattered most was Linda's. Her phone, once full of quiet texts and sudden invitations, was now silent. No. Want to get coffee? No. Let's drive somewhere no one knows us. No. No. I longed for the tranquility when we were together. What Jack didn't know was that only a few hours after the news spread, Linda was called back to the Fairchild estate, almost like a soldier summoned to battle. As soon as she stepped into the grand marble entrance, the door slammed shut behind her. They took her phone, severing all her access. Her father walked in circles in his office, a man who felt betrayed not by the media, but by his own daughter. "You've disgraced our family," he shouted, his voice rising. Running around the city with a taxi driver. "Do you understand what the board is saying? What the media is doing to our reputation?" Linda stood firm, her chin held high, even though her heart raced like a storm. "They're saying I'm human, and maybe that's exactly what this family needs." Her father's face turned even redder. "He's using you." "No," she replied sharply. "He's the only one who's never asked anything from me." His jaw tightened. "This ends now." The following morning, Jack received a letter delivered by hand, thick, embossed paper. Was it an invitation? No, it was a summons to Fairchild Global's downtown office. He nearly tossed it aside, almost deciding to stay home. But something inside him urged him to go, to face whatever was waiting for him. He arrived in his best clothes, a well-worn but pressed shirt, jeans that were intact, and boots he polished as best as he could. Security escorted him through the sleek marble hallways, into a room made of glass and cold metal. The city sprawled behind it like an empire. At the head of the table sat Richard Fairchild, flanked by lawyers, unsmiling, calculating. One of the lawyers slid a manila envelope across the table. "This," the man said smoothly, "is a token of gratitude, a trade for your discretion and cooperation in removing yourself from Miss Fairchild's life. No press, no contact, no complications." Jack stared at the envelope, unmoving. "And if I don't take it?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Mr. Fairchild leaned forward, his voice icy. "Then I'll make sure you never drive in this city again. Licenses, permits, reputation, gone. One call is all it takes." Jack finally reached for the envelope, not to open it, but to gently push it back. "I didn't help your daughter to gain anything," he said. "I helped her because she seemed to be drowning. I didn't know who she was. I didn't care." Fairchild's nostrils flared. "You think you can actually belong in her world?" Jack stood up. "I don't need to belong to her world. I just need to be worthy of her. And you don't get to decide that." He turned to leave, pausing once. "You can buy silence, but you can't buy love. And you sure as hell can't kill it with a check." He walked out. The envelope stayed on the table, untouched. That night, Jack climbed to the rooftop of his building. The wind was sharp, and the city lights below flickered like a language only he could understand. Somewhere out there, behind thick walls and locked gates, Linda was gazing at the same sky. He sat on the rooftop edge, looking out, letting the quiet settle around him like armor. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew this. He would wait, and when the time came, he'd be ready. Jack vanished. No messages, no calls, no trace of him anywhere in the city he had once driven through daily. His cab was no longer outside his usual diner. The garage where he worked part-time said he had quit. His apartment was vacated. No forwarding address. Linda tried everything. She contacted every cab company in town, sent emails, even drove to the neighborhoods he had shown her. But it was as if the night had swallowed him whole. Her father believed it was over, that the silence meant defeat, but Linda knew better. One sleepless night, sitting alone in her childhood room, surrounded by things that never felt like hers, she opened her laptop and began writing. Not as the heiress, not as a woman in headlines, but as a girl who once felt cold, lonely, and was saved by someone who never asked for anything. She titled the post, "The Rain and the Man Who Saved Me." She shared everything. The night she fled, the fear in the alley, the moment Jack stopped his cab and protected her without questioning who she was. Their late-night adventures, the sandwiches, the fireworks, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, like she was just a girl, not a name. "I don't know where he is now," she wrote in the final paragraph. "But if you see him, tell him I still remember the silence in the cab, the safety in his presence, and how he never once asked for anything in return. Tell him I miss him." She hit publish and closed the laptop. By morning, the post had gone viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. Strangers from across the globe shared the story. News sites picked it up, talk shows mentioned it, and people everywhere speculated. A week later, Linda was invited to appear on a live morning talk show. The host promised to focus on the story, not the scandal. She agreed, dressed simply in a blue blouse, her hair tucked behind her ears. She sat under the bright studio lights and told the story again for the cameras. "I didn't fall in love with a fairy tale," she said. "I found something real and lost it because of fear." The host leaned forward. "If he were watching now, what would you say?" Linda faced the camera, her voice soft as a whisper. "I'd say come back." A brief silence fell. Then a soft murmur spread across the crowd. A figure appeared in the distance. Linda turned, her heart racing. There he was, Jack, still in his plain jacket, his hair slightly longer, his eyes unwavering as ever. He seemed out of place, uncertain, yet undeniably present. The audience gasped. The host stood up. Linda didn't. She didn't need to. She dashed past the cameras, past the bright lights, straight into his embrace. The room burst into applause, but for a moment, it was just the two of them. "I read it," Jack said quietly. Linda held him tight. "I meant every word." And just like that, the silence between them was shattered, not by grand declarations, but by something much more powerful, a reunion. The applause continued to fill the studio, growing like an unstoppable wave, with clapping and cheers flooding the space. The audience stood, some with tears, others grinning as they watched Linda hold Jack tightly. On the stage, the cameras clicked relentlessly, flashes lighting up like small fireworks, but neither of them paid any attention. The spotlight could have disappeared entirely, and they still wouldn't have noticed. The only thing that mattered was the steady beat of Jack's heart beneath her hands. Real, familiar, grounded in a world that often felt too fake. Her breath hitched, and when she finally pulled back enough to look into his eyes, they were just as she remembered, gentle, steady, and filled with something she hadn't dared hope for. "If you leave again," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you'd better take me with you." Jack chuckled softly, the sound deep and full of relief. Resting his forehead against hers, he said in a low, assured tone, "I won't leave. Not again." And somehow, those words anchored them. They stood still, as though the world had faded into background noise. The audience, the cameras, the lights, all disappeared, leaving just the two of them in a stillness that felt sacred. No scripts, no headlines, just truth. The host stepped forward slowly, breaking the quiet with her voice. Well, she smiled, I think we've all just witnessed something very real. Jack and Linda turned toward the audience, still holding hands, as though letting go would unravel everything they fought to rebuild. Jack cleared his throat, looking down for a moment before meeting their gaze. I didn't come here for the spotlight, he said. Honestly, I didn't even want to come at first. But if this moment, this story, can remind just one person that love isn't about last names or bank accounts or where you come from, then I guess being here was worth it. The crowd erupted once more, louder this time, not just in applause, but in a collective release, as though they, too, had needed that reminder. After the broadcast, the internet buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a scandal. It was a celebration. The headlines shifted. Linda Fairchild's second chance at real love. Taxi driver's loyalty moves millions. Love wins where money fails. Videos of the moment flooded social media. Hashtags like hashtag Jack and Linda and hashtag real love trended for days. Even celebrities joined in, praising the couple's honesty, bravery, and their refusal to conform to the rules of privilege and appearances. Of course, not everyone approved. The usual tabloids tried to turn it into something shallow. Critics whispered about image manipulation. The high society circles exchanged knowing glances and muttered disapproval over their champagne. But it didn't matter. For the first time, Linda and Jack didn't have to hide. And they weren't going to. The following week, they sat down for their first public interview together. The set was simple, the mood intimate. No drama, no glamour, just two chairs, one hand resting over the other. They spoke about that rainy night, the fear, the silence in the cab, and how Jack never once asked who she was. He didn't save me because he knew my name, Linda said, looking directly into the camera. He saved me because he saw someone in pain and chose to help. That's the man I love. Jack, quieter now, his hands still intertwined with hers, nodded. I never believed I was enough for her world. But she never asked me to be anything other than myself. And that, he continued, that's what love does. It makes you believe you belong. From that point on, they moved forward, not as a scandal, not as a twist of fate, but as something far deeper. A decision, a vow. Whatever challenges came their way, they would confront them, hand in hand, side by side. A year later, the yellow taxi was still running, but now it had a new name boldly painted on its sides. Taxi of Hope. The idea had emerged from a single conversation between Jack and Linda, sitting on their modest couch, sipping tea while watching the city lights flicker outside. Jack had said, I wish more people could feel safe just stepping into a car, to which Linda had responded, then let's give them that. And from that simple exchange, the plan took root and blossomed. Taxi of Hope turned into a free service for the most vulnerable, elderly people needing rides to doctor's appointments, pregnant women heading to the hospital, struggling families who just needed reliable transportation. The first cab was Jack's, naturally, the same one that had stopped for Girl in the Rain. Then came a second, followed by a third, all donated by people moved by their story. Mechanics volunteered to help, local businesses offered discounts, and more drivers joined the initiative, not for money, but for a cause. Linda took charge of the logistics, the fundraising, and the website. She refused to leverage her father's name for the program's success. This isn't a charity, she'd say. It's a thank you. They lived in a small apartment on the third floor of a brownstone with squeaky stairs and a stubborn heater. In the winter, the space was filled with plants, mismatched coffee mugs, and shelves packed with books and memories. Jack still made breakfast every morning. Linda still teased him about how he folded the laundry, and each night they curled up together, finding a peace neither of them had ever known. When the time came for their wedding, they both agreed on one thing. No ballroom, no tuxedos, no fancy invitations. Instead, they went in the park where they first shared that silent connection. The ceremony was simple. Folding chairs, a few strands of lights, and guests who had at some point been passengers in Jack's cab. There was Mrs. Holloway. The 82-year-old Jack used to drive to her eye appointments. There was Carla, the single mother who called Jack while in labor when she had no one else. And there was little Ava, who once left her stuffed rabbit in the back seat, only for Jack to return across town that same night. Every guest came with a story, a smile, a tear. Each brought a flower, which Linda carried down the aisle, forming a bouquet of their shared history. Jack waited under the tree where they once watched fireworks, dressed in a simple gray suit. Linda wore a white dress she had sewn parts of herself. Not extravagant, but full of meaning. When they exchanged vows, Jack's voice wavered. "I don't promise perfect," he said, "but I promise real." And Linda, with tears in her eyes, replied, "You gave me something I never knew I needed, a reason to trust someone again." They kissed, the cheers and birdsong blending with the city's quiet hum. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the world turned golden, they sat on the hood of the taxi that had started it all. Linda leaned into Jack's shoulder, her hand resting gently over his heart. She gazed out at the horizon and spoke softly. "I used to think I needed an empire, that love had to come with chandeliers, diamonds, and a last name everyone respected." She paused, smiling. But that night in the rain, I realized all I ever needed was someone brave enough to stop. Someone who saw not who I was, but who I could become. Jack didn't reply. He simply took her hand and held it as if he never planned to let go. And so, from one rainy night and a simple act of bravery, a love story was born. Not in grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but in quiet acts of kindness, shared strength, and the beauty of two hearts choosing one another against all odds. Because sometimes the greatest journeys begin not with a destination, but with a single moment of humanity when someone decides to stop. If this story moved you, made you believe in love again, or simply reminded you that compassion still exists in this world, please consider subscribing to Echoes of Resilience here. Every story is a journey to the heart. Click subscribe and let us bring you tales that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the last word. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes one small act of kindness can change a life forever.